Good evening and welcome everyone to another episode of Pages to Progress. We have been looking at the book Timothy Keller's Generous Justice. You can follow us if you want, just by ordering the book online from Amazon, or you could follow some of the episodes that we've been putting together. Each week we review one of the chapters. You can go to eastsidesda.org/pages to progress. As usual, I'm with two marvelous people in conversation, Dee and John. It's not Jody, it's John, just so you know. And so we're going to be in conversation today on chapter 5, the why should we do justice? Why should we do justice? So I'm going to kick things off this week, diving straight into it. It's been quite a hefty chapter, talked about a number of different stuff. I'm going to start off the back at the very beginning of the chapter. The question that was kind of posited in my mind as I reflected on the chapter is, can you express love altruistically? Can you express love without wanting to try and get anything in return for yourself? Can it be totally and unconditional in the way that you bring across love? I have to be honest and say I couldn't answer the question. It's not a question that I can answer totally easily. For a number of years, I've been struggling with this question. There are many parts to this question which I don't think is possible. But then I wondered to myself, God wants us to unconditionally love, and I'm conflicted by that. But it did point me to something that this book kind of brought out for me. And it's mainly talking about the motivation as to why someone should do justice, specifically talking about the image of God. And this is on page 82. I'm going to read this. It says, one biblical motivation for doing justice is to look to the beginning of the Bible, to creation, where the Bible tells us, so God created man in his own image. What does being an image mean? It conveys the idea of being a work of art or of great craftsmanship. So here's the point that kind of resonated for me, is if therefore we are to be images of God, declaring a false image by not standing up for justice, therefore brings across the idea that we are presenting a wrong kind of God. Learning and knowing that we are built and made in God's image means that we have a rubric, something that we can actually follow to recognize this is the God that I represent, the God who stands up for injustice. Stands up to fight against injustice. Those are my initial thoughts off the back, opening with the chapter. Dee, John, do you want to respond to that, or would you like to share something else that has popped out for you?
Yeah, I can share something with that line of thought. Definitely, in my life, whether it is having to do with justice or anything at all, the idea that you want to honor God because God has chosen to create you in his image. I suppose he could have chosen you to create in another image, I suppose, right? I mean, he's a creator. He could do whatever he wants.
He could have.
But he chose to create you in his image. And definitely as a person who's professing to be a follower of Christ, you don't want to be dishonoring that image, that God, right? What you put out there. So oftentimes, again, like I said, whether it has to do with the subject of, justice or helping the poor, whatever it might be, that you want to, it does stop you. It stops you to think about, hey, what image am I portraying? Am I honoring God if I chose to do this or if I choose not to do this? And that does propel you to think twice and act accordingly. So definitely for me, it's always been, that's always as part of my thought process, I think. And yeah, and also another thing, I think, along with this line, in his creation, the fact that he had created the man and the woman to be equal. And to me, that was huge in reading it, because the fact that, we grow up society. And we know from the past times, even from the very beginning, after the creation, the woman has always been the second citizen. And, Jesus came to earth and really demonstrated that he really does treat everyone equally. So just having that in my mind, really, you cannot possibly treat somebody less than you, if knowing that, right? Yeah, I mean, it works for me.
I like what Dee's saying and where Dee's going with that, because man and woman were treated equally in God's eyes. I think is a fair way to say that. But they also, I think we need to acknowledge represented humanity as we know it. I mean, everyone came from Adam and Eve. And I think, just thinking about that is amazing, because all your different nationalities, all the different people, the way they look and the way they're the same and where they're different, it all comes back to the same two people and their genetics that God, through his infinite wisdom, was able to create. And so that's what you made me think of, Dee. I think I like what you're saying, Sam, but it bothers me a little bit that it's a little bit narrow. And obviously we're talking about justice. The image of God in the context of justice is relevant. But I just want to say, I mean, the image of God is a lot of things, and in ways different for different people, and not something you can just nail down necessarily. And I think Keller mentions that, and it's that page 83, the end of the second paragraph, or that middle paragraph. Beware of trying to nail it down into a list. And I don't think there's a problem with listing it, but any list you make is going to be incomplete for sure. And a priority of those listed items is going to be different for different people. I like what he said at the beginning part of that paragraph, where the word image can also mean to resemble and to represent. And I do truly believe that in all we do and say, we represent God, and in that way resemble that image that he originally bestowed upon Adam and Eve and all the rest of us.
Let me just add to that, and I'm going to use the example that's right in front of me, John. It's behind you. There's an image on the wall. There's a painting. I don't know what exactly it is. Some kind of
John James Audubon.
Okay. Is that a bird on a tree?
Curved bill curlew. Yes.
Okay. Right. So, what is it? A curved bill
curlew.
Curlew. Okay. So, if we were to use that as an example, the curved bill curlew, that is not a curved bill curlew. That is an image of a curved bill.
True. Fair enough. True.
And in the same respect, we are not gods. We are images of God. And I think one of the most profound things for me is there are huge implications, even though we cannot nail it down, which I totally agree with. There are huge implications as to the type of image that we bring across to everyone who looks upon it. Because if we individually and as a church, or whoever it is, as a group of people, do not stand for injustice, that is the painting that everyone sees, and they assume that that is what the actual thing is, because we are just pictures of the thing.
Right.
And the implications are massive, because there's so much pressure then on everyone to get the image right. But I think that's also comes in harmony what you were trying to say, John, in the fact of we can't nail this down, because so many people have painted over the centuries what God looks like. I'm not necessarily talking about a white Jesus or a black Jesus.
And they've abused that to their own advantage.
Right.
In a lot of ways as well.
Exactly, like the justification for slavery, for instance, and how the Bible was used to try and say this is God's will, etc. But but I think what Keller really does bring out and he says this in the chapter, it's actually titled, honoring the image. Right. Where we may not be able to get it down to a T, the honoring of the image. There is a reason why you bought that painting and you put it up, because it honors the true reality of what that bird is.
That's truer than you may think, because it happens to be one of my favorite birds. I am a birder to some degree, and there's a couple good stories having to do with a bird like that, and some stuff I've done with my dad.
Okay.
So
as far as you're concerned, every time you look at that, it's definitely meaningful, because it's not just a made up image. It's something that is quite profound. But I think that is the perfect analogy that kind of bridges the gap as to what Keller was trying to communicate about us, and the how profound it is that we are literally the paintings for the world to see Jesus. Anything else, guys, that really...
Yes, so he's using that image in the context of the Bible giving us as believers, in his opinion at least, two motivations for why we should do justice, which is the chapter title. And so the other one...
Sorry, and just to interject, the reason why he does that is because he proposes that the secular world, or people who do not believe in God, we cannot propose that they have a moral obligation to do justice, because they simply just don't believe it. And it doesn't work as something viable. So therefore, he presents the image. Go on, John.
And he goes on to say, particularly in these times, whereas maybe 50 to 100 years ago, there was the sense that there was more of a moral obligation, no matter what you believed.
Right.
But we live in times where people don't necessarily believe at all and don't feel like they have an obligation based on any beliefs. But so this was the first motivation that Keller touches on. The second motivation is coming up in grace, which is a little bit, well, it's about the mid portion of the chapter.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Actually on page 94, the single sentence that captured me was, "Grace should make you just."
So did you like that?
I love that.
Yeah, I hated it.
Oh, wow.
Hated might be too strong of a word.
Okay.
What page are you guys talking about?
Page 94, just at the top, first about fourth line.
Oh, yeah, I underlined it. Grace should make you just.
I guess Dee underlined it because she liked it as well.
So tell me why you liked it.
Okay. I liked it because the reality of accepting God's unmerited favor should change an individual. And it should change an individual so that their posture is now centered on making someone see things the way God sees things. That's why I liked it.
Well, what about you, Dee?
I think I'm along the same line. I think that even in my own personal experience, once I understood God's grace toward me, how, he sees me regardless of my sins, you can't help but look at other people the same way, with the same kind of grace and mercy. I mean, you are no longer, there are things in life, there are crimes that happen in life that still shock you, but it's more, response now more is, oh my goodness, it's like you can't help feeling the compassion, the sadness and the pain for that individual person who have committed a crime, or who have done, or maybe not even crime, but who's end up in a dump, or who's a homeless, or whatever it is. And it removes that blaming on that individual, but rather looking at it through the eyes of grace of God, knowing that you could be that person. that you could so easily be in that person's shoes, honestly. So yeah, it really has changed me a lot in that aspect.
Okay, John, break us to pieces.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm not going to break you to pieces because it's my own personal struggle. And I'll tell you, I struggled with this chapter. The first part, the moral obligation thing, I think there's a responsibility to being human and part of humanity as a whole. And so I get that, and I probably believe it in the old-fashioned kind of way than more the way people believe it about it now. But this sentence, grace should make you just. And then obviously it pulls in Paul and, and James and what they talk about with justification, and how, you have to have faith, but then you also have to have works. And I guess what I struggle with is it is so much of the same stuff I've heard, and I believe with all my heart, but I have a hard time feeling it and seeing it come through my life and my words and actions naturally, like I truly believe it should. And I think a lot of it is because I'm not as emotional of a person as a lot of people. I have a hard time dealing with emotion. I have a hard time with compassion. I have to work extra hard to even bring across the feeling of compassion. And I don't think it's anything wrong with me spiritually. I think it's just the way I've been made. And it frustrates me when people throw out statements like that. And it's like, yes, I agree theoretically, but practically, it's much harder than that. Practically, I'm a sinner in a world of sin. I struggle with selfishness and self-centeredness, which does, unfortunately, make it easier for me to just walk by someone and not even notice them. I mean, a reference maybe even to the last chapter. I do feel an obligation that if I do notice a person, I do feel the Spirit working in me to help that person. And I'll say there was redemption by the end of this chapter for me. But so much of it seemed like stuff I've struggled with, and ultimately walked away often saying, maybe I'm more of a theoretical Christian than I am in reality. And it's not totally true, but it's just the way I feel a lot of times with my struggles.
Maybe. I'm wondering if it isn't just only about feelings though, because to become someone who is just, I think Keller did imply this, that you have to care, and to care you have to feel. And when you walk by a situation that is unjust, maybe you feel less than because you want to be able to feel something here, like an ache or something. But love is a choice, is it not? Both of you are married. I'm sure you can resonate with that statement.
Well, I think there is a type of love that is a choice for sure.
And it's something that you wake up every day and you choose that you're going to love your spouse. You're going to love this person. There are many reasons for you to probably decide why you're not going to love that person, I'm sure. But it is a posture, it is a decision that you take. The concept of caring for those, or seek or opening your eyes to be able to see someone who is in need of help, I think is just as much cognitive as it is as much feel. I think that you're right in bringing across the fact that it is just how you are made. There are so many people who are like you. I think I'm a little bit more emotional as a guy, I guess, in some respects, but in the same respects, I've been desensitized to a lot. And so I think it's a mixture of both for me. I don't know. What do you think, Dee? Do you?
I completely understand where John's coming from. And John, you will probably disagree with me when I say this, but when I hear, even though I completely understand what you're saying, there's a side of me that is wondering, instead of you saying that you are a guy who doesn't really feel much. Maybe you're a little more theoretical, but I think maybe it comes down to that you haven't really truly been, maybe not even truly, but maybe not even close to being homeless or receiving forgiveness. I'm not talking about between husband and wife, you get into fight and you say, I'm sorry, honey, blah, blah, blah. None of that stuff, but more in a deeper level. So I guess, because I know this, I always think that no matter like how much we talk about marriage, unless you are married, you really don't understand it. And no matter how much we talk about like pregnancy, the woman, you don't really know until you experience it. And for me personally, even though I have always had sympathy and compassion for the homeless people, it didn't truly hit me home until, there was a time when my husband, when Kosuke lost job, and I realized, wow, just how easy it is to literally lose everything overnight, and to having experienced those kind of things and other stuff in my life, I think I do believe that, that we are born with different characteristics, and some feel more comfortable with certain characteristics, but I think that when you are closer to whatever the issues that you are talking about, and you have actually experienced it or close to something like that, I think you end up feeling more. I think you can't help it. I think it just comes.
Well, and that's where Keller gets into this middle class in spirit.
Yeah, I think that's towards the end, right?
Where is that, John?
He mentions middle class and spirit on page 102. And this is kind of, I'll tell you, I went through this whole chapter, and it wasn't until I got to page 101 that it's subtitled A New Attitude Toward the Poor. And then page 104, where it's a new attitude for the poor. And he kind of balances, well, he uses the statement, blessed are the poor in spirit. And he
I wasn't following him when he said it first, because I was just like, no, this is a poor breakdown of poor in spirit. But then I caught what he said towards the end.
Yes. So blessed are the poor in spirit. And then he talks about the spirit being, people that are acknowledging their spiritual bankruptcy.
Right.
And that's at the bottom of page 101. And then he kind of gets into this, this middle class in the spirit.
Can I read page 102? He makes the breakdown. He says, my experience as a pastor has been that those who are middle class in spirit tend to be indifferent to the poor, but people who come to grasp the gospel of grace and become spiritually poor find their hearts gravitating towards the materially poor. That's his statement that I wrestled with.
Right.
And okay. And just
he continues that on page 103 when he says, when you come upon those who are economically poor, you cannot say to them, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I mean, I think we've all done that to some point.
Because you certainly did not do that spiritually, he continues.
Exactly, because you certainly did not do that spiritually,
right?
Because Jesus intervened for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand that, and I agree with it. And I guess the one redeeming thing, and he talks about rich people and contrasts them with poor people and the perspective. And I think I get what he's saying. At the bottom of page 103, and he kind of talks about Paul and James a bit, but at the bottom of page 103, he says, James proposes that a rich person who becomes a believer would spiritually benefit by especially thinking his or her sinfulness before God, thinking about his or her sinfulness before God, since out of the world he or she gets nothing but a claim. On the other hand, a poor person who becomes a believer would spiritually benefit by especially thinking about his or her new high spiritual status, since out in the world he or she gets nothing but disdain. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being motivated by more of an obligation versus grace. I think for me, it's a process. And I think that there's this last sentence, and then I'll be quiet and let you guys talk. But the middle of page 104, it says, someone who does not show any signs of at least gradual identity transformation in this manner does not give evidence of having really grasped the gospel.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, that's not me, because maybe through a different way than like D, who's felt, maybe possibly impending financial bankruptcy versus spiritual bankruptcy. Maybe it's more me seeking and logically pursuing reasons and what I'm responsible for as a believer in God that directs me towards this help of the poor versus more emotionally pursuing the same kind.
Can I interrupt you, John, and just ask the question? How do you measure your non-transformation?
Well, that's a good question, because I think it's gradual enough that it may not be measurable.
Because I asked the question because you suffer from the same problem that we all suffer from. We want the results, and we want the results that look like X person or X thing.
And it's different for every person.
It really is, because your upbringing is different to mine. Dee's upbringing is different to mine. None of you have seen the things that I've seen with the context that I have, with the story that I have, and vice versa. And I think the being part of a kingdom movement is being part of a community who has their posture centered towards Jesus. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself, as a byproduct, offers transformation that you may or may not be able to measure. Because and this is the problem with many of our legalistic approaches, is we are constantly seeking ways to try and measure that, and then we aim to try and make that scale a uniform thing for everyone to follow. This is how it must look like. This is how it must be. I think Keller is making it very broad and uncomfortable for us in the recognition that how you think will ultimately change. Let me ask you this question, John. Do you think theologically the same way that you did 5 years ago?
No, absolutely not. Okay. And not the same as I did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's an amazing transformative process. This pursuit of God and a relationship with God has changed me in ways, I can't even begin to say, because it's in ways sometimes I probably haven't even noticed. And when you put it in the context of 5 or 10 years or 20 years, it's a lot. But there is still that sense of spiritual bankruptcy where I still have so far to go. I'm not even close in so many ways. And there's a certain amount of despair. But by the end of this chapter, I will say there was hope, because I didn't feel like I was totally off course. Whereas initially I was like, wow, this is the same thing I've struggled with for years, and I just don't seem like I've made headway, but I have.
Right.
I think we all feel that way. I certainly definitely do not feel like I'm anywhere near where I should be, where I would like, I think where God would want me to be as far as my spirituality goes. I mean, yes, I've grown tremendously, but at the same time, I still feel the same way. I'm spiritually bankrupt. This is why I need God.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we can speak as 3 middle-class people right now, at least in comparison to the rest of the world, that our privileges do prevent us from allowing us to see and experience the things that other people see. I think Dee made a really important point earlier on when she was talking about, unless you have experienced it yourself, you'll never be able to fully grapple with it or barely even empathize. this is why the call of the Christian is to literally go and hang out with them. And I don't think we intentionally take enough time to broaden our circles and our interactions. Most of my friends and those who I interact with are middle class, just like me. Why? Because we do middle class things. I remember when I was part of a church in London, and I remember every time we would go out to eat, there was a bunch of us of the same age group. We were all working. We all had a salary. And so the concept of going out to eat was not a problem for us. But then there were a few individuals who always never came along. They never came along. And we always thought that they were busy, that they were tired, they had things on the plate, until we actually realized, we never confronted them about it, but we actually realized to ourselves, actually, maybe they're not coming because I don't think they can afford it. I think that's the reason. And I think we need to learn in that scenario, we definitely needed to craft scenarios that would allow people to be comfortable in our space without spending money. That's what it looks like to hang out with people who don't live a physically minded. And that's just one example of.
You almost have to be proactive to open yourself up to other groups.
Right.
Because I think it's just human nature, and the comfort you have with the consistency you have in your life. It's hard to step outside of that.
Exactly.
And it's stressful in a lot of ways, and you just don't do it naturally.
It is. And it definitely doesn't come in just going down to the homeless soup kitchen and just pouring in some soup for them. It probably comes in turning up consistently and being part of the team, knowing people by name, and investing in that space that you may not be totally uncomfortable. And that's my issue, I think, investing in spaces that I'm not comfortable with.
Well, that's the whole concept of community. Community is not kind of one and done.
Right.
It's a commitment of time and money, for at least somewhat of an extended period of time.
Right. Folks, our time has gone, but I'm going to end with page 108, where Keller sums things up, and he says this: if you would be like Christ, give much, give often, give freely to the vile and poor, the thankless and the undeserving. Christ is glorious and happy, and so will you be. Lots to talk about, lots to think about. Thanks for joining me on the conversation, guys. I always enjoy having the conversation with you guys because you guys stretch me. But you too can also join us who are listening on the conversation. Each week we cover a chapter in a book that we've selected, and Pages to Progress is essentially about turning each page so that we can progress bit by bit. If you want to follow us, we're looking at Timothy Keller's book, Generous Justice. Jump online to Amazon, order it today, and you can join us mid-chapter if you want. If you're a speed reader, you can catch up. And it's also a good book for your library if you ever want to try and delve in. You can see all of our episodes on eastsidesda.org/pages to progress. Thanks for joining us, but this is us saying goodbye for now until next week, where we will look at chapter 6, which I shall dub as Dee's chapter, How Should We Do Justice?
Finally, the how.
My chapter 2, I've always wondered about the how.
So we look forward to delving into the how next week. Please join us. But until then, stay safe. Have a great week. Take care. God bless you.
Bye.